Well, more, of course, on this, because the ANC's National Executive Committee has now said it wants to delay the closure of several coal-fired power plants and basically to try and get more electricity from them for longer. This means there will be a change in Cabinet's previous policy to shut down the power plants in line with government's commitment to stop climate change and pollution. At the same time, the outgoing Chief Operating Officer at Eskom, Jan Oberholzer, has said in an interview this week that he believes there could be some merit in keeping these plants open, but that they could not be improved quickly and probably would not be able to generate a lot of power for at least a full year. Dr. Vishwas Satgar is an activist with the Climate Justice Charter Movement. Dr. Satgar, good afternoon to you. So the ANC and others, and Ramakorpa, they say there is merit in keeping these coal-fired power plants open for longer. They say we need the electricity. How do you see it?
Well, basically, let's start off with where this problem came from. It came from the ANC about 15 years ago when Thabo Mbeki did not listen to Eskom. It has been worsened by the ANC over 15 years. Mismanagement, dysfunction, denuding of planning capacity, corruption, and criminality. So they brought us to this place, and what they are proposing is a further lock-in into coal emissions. Now, this has very, very serious implications for the country. I think in the first instance, the Just Energy Transition Partnership, and we've cautioned Western governments about the ANC government. In the first instance, our caution was about their commitment, unequivocal, to renewable energy investment. So you're talking about $120 billion, $8 billion being injected directly into renewable energy. Now, that's not happening here. The second implication here, of course, is our international commitments to bring down carbon emissions. As you know, Stephen, we're one of the most carbon-intensive economies in the world, and there's no excuse. Our commitment in terms of the Just Energy Transition Plan is to bring down our emissions by between 22 to 33% by 2030. Now, that's not even ambitious enough. The UN General Secretary, in completing the sixth cycle of reporting, has called on all governments in the world to accelerate the deep just transition. We are heading for catastrophe. He expects governments by 2025, when there's a new round of commitments to be made, to see more ambitious commitments. By 2030, there's an expectation that at least 45% of emissions will be cut in countries. The South African government is completely off target, is completely off track. The second consequence of this decision is that it locks the country further into more corruption, more wastage, and more criminality. The disruptions in everyday life of South Africans, the impacts on our economy, and particularly on the informal sector and small businesses, have been devastating. This is a quick fix solution. Many of these coal-fired power stations are not fit for purpose. So, they are going to try and squeeze out whatever life they can out of it because they brought us into this mess. What's clear here, Stephen, is that they've missed an opportunity to place the country on a climate emergency footing and genuinely accelerate the deep just transition. And we can talk more about that.
Okay. I mean, the argument from government is that we have no option. The argument from government is, and from the ANC as I understand it, is that we are in a massive crisis now, what's happening in our economy. And let's be clear, load shedding, I'm absolutely certain. I mean, I accept that climate change costs lives, particularly in Mpumalanga, where these coal-fired power plants are. I accept that evidence. I think it must also be true that load shedding costs lives, certainly costs the economy, and that costs lives. So the argument would be to reduce load shedding, we need to keep them open.
So, Stephen, if we were genuine about placing the country on a climate emergency footing, we would take the science of climate change very seriously. In the next decade, we will overshoot 1.5 degrees Celsius globally, and we'll be at 3 degrees. That's going to have devastating consequences for this country. But keeping that in mind, in the immediate term, there's various things the government could have done. The first, of course, is pass our climate planning bill so that workers and communities in Eskom, around Eskom, could have been engaged immediately in planning this just transition so nobody gets left behind. The second thing is, of course, our integrated resource planning. It doesn't center renewable energy. The government could have immediately lifted the ceiling on that and pushed that through very, very strongly. The third thing they could have done immediately was ensuring that, independent power producers are there, they're a given, but that their transmission and contribution to the problem would have been problem-free. The fourth thing that could have been done was with big energy users. In this country, we have various free riders on cheap coal-based electricity. They could have been squeezed with high carbon taxes. At the same time, not just a 100 megawatt sort of concession, basically push them to maximize, if you like, their commitment to renewable energy. The other option that could have kicked in very quickly is to set a target of about 3 to 4 months for big institutions in our society, hospitals, universities, government buildings, etc., to transition rapidly. And of course, lastly, to provide support to local governments. Remove the red tape, ensure that local governments are given maximum support, incentives for households, particularly lower tax brackets, so that there is some kind of fiscal support for them to transition. The middle classes will find their way, of course, and many of them are. We could introduce tariff feedback mechanisms, etc. But in all of this, none of these proposals are really coming to the fore. And that tells you something about commitment. It tells you about collective will. It's clear that there are very powerful interests, vested interests around coal and wanting to keep this coal-fired, corrupt energy system going. Okay. And that's what we are dealing with in South Africa.
Dr. Satgar, I mean, it looks like, from what I can see, my political sense would be that we're going to see government taking this decision. Is there any way to stop them? I mean, would you go to court on this?
Well, I think, all options have to be on the table. I mean, right now the government is, while it's doing what it's doing with Eskom, is also pushing offshore oil and gas extraction. And it's pushing it in a big way, including the Minister of Environment wanting to lock it into our marine spatial planning. So in that regard, yes, there's legal options on the table. But more than that, I think South African citizens have to show their dislike, their disgust for the situation in next year's election. I think that's going to be a powerful moment to let the ANC know that we are tired of the mess that they've taken us all into.
Dr. Vishwas Satgar, a strong view from him, from the Climate Justice Charter Movement. Really do appreciate the time. Thank you.